I think a lot of boomers want to feel morally superior to the US. And so Trump coming in and saying something to Canada made them want to hate Trump. And then the closest affiliation politically to Trump was the Conservatives, even though Pierre didn't align with Trump. He should have, as you said, because he got put in the same basket anyhow, or at least espoused it. And then that desire to feel morally superior trumped what the nation needs. And these baby boomers who have it so good, they have all of the wealth. They voted for their dental benefits. They voted for the status quo, and they voted for their comfort over the country.
Hey folks, as you may have seen, I just got back from a BJJ and healing retreat for veterans put on by David and Cordy from Becoming Ohm, a husband and wife team doing incredible work for veterans' mental health. But my involvement with them actually started before that. I've been working with them in their online coaching program for the last 3 months and I'm already signed up for 3 more. What I love about this program is that it meets you right at where you're at. You don't have to fly to Mexico or go sit in the jungle to start healing. They help you make real changes in your day-to-day life while teaching you how to work with plant medicine in a safe, intentional, and grounded way. This isn't some weird hippie stuff, but like a legit way to improve your mental health. For me, it's helped me stay more present with my family and respond better in situations that used to set me off. They've worked with over 100 veterans, first responders, and civilians in the last couple of years. The next round of their mindful microdosing program starts April 28th. And I know half the spots are already filled with people who came to the retreat. If you want to learn more, go follow them on Instagram at becoming.ohm and shoot them a message with the words hard to kill. David will hook you up with all the info plus a special offer just for listeners of the podcast. Becoming Ohm has been a huge part of my journey, and I know that can help you too. Even if you've been let down by everything modern medicine or Veterans Affairs has to offer you so far. Let's rip. Folks, I'm sitting down with regular guest now, Phillip Millar. Phil, how you doing, man?
Well, all things considered, not bad. I've been talking a lot about politics, but it's not really where I wanted to be talking about, but I think there's lots to talk about.
Absolutely. So folks, depending on when you're listening to this, we just had an election here in Canada. We just elected our new government, which actually with all that effort and all that campaigning just ended up being the exact same thing we had for the last 10 years. Like I still haven't fully digested this in terms of like, as a country, what are we doing? What are we doing? We had 10 years of evidence that we're not going in the right direction, yet we still voted to have the exact same status quo. So Phil, thoughts?
I think my Substack article this morning is doing quite well, but I sum it up at like how playing not to lose results in losing. And just to get right to the meat, I remember talking to some conservative strategists and saying, why isn't he on Rogan, Theo Vaughn, and Patrick Bet-Davis? And his advisors were like, we don't want to lose. We don't want to make a mistake. We don't like Trump. And the lesson I get is like, people are going to hate you anyhow. He was still labeled with that brush, but he didn't communicate our leader, our conservative candidate, Pierre Poilievre or whatever. To me, he showed cowardice in that he wouldn't risk being a change agent. He tried to play by the traditional media rules. And all of us know that traditional media is not skewing towards favorable coverage of the conservatives. And he lost because I think he let himself be managed. Just like Kamala Harris should have gone on Joe Rogan, and her aide said, don't go on Joe Rogan, right? Because I don't like him. Like that's not the way you change the world or get momentum. And I think there was definitely a conservative swell in Canada, but he got destroyed by the liberal media and his reluctance to engage with people like you, other long form content providers.
Yeah, I have to totally agree with that. And, I was reaching out through the Veteran Affairs channel with folks I know there, because originally they were interested in hopping on when they had a commanding lead. Mm-hmm. Okay, cool. Yeah, absolutely. What do we need to make this happen? I'd absolutely have them on. And in all fairness, I would have had any candidate on. Yeah. PPC, liberal, because I want to hear what you have to say in a longer form content fashion. Like that's just how I get my information these days. And I think a lot of folks, especially, our generation or younger, that's how we're figuring out the world these days. So to echo what you said, like, yeah, people like Kamala Harris, their handlers basically just said, no. You may say something that is slightly off brand or off topic or might lose a percentage in the polls, we can't afford to lose. And that's exactly the same message that I got, that the alignment with the Republican Party was seen as negative, and the core base of about 20% of the conservatives really can't stand Donald Trump. So any rhetoric that would have been aligned with Republicanism or Trumpian politics would have been seen as a way to lose. And the best quote I heard was actually Matt Gaetz was talking to Viva Frei. I don't know if you saw that in an interview. Yeah. And he said, like, if you're going to pay the piper, you might as well dance.
Yeah.
Like Poilievre was already tarnished or tainted as like a Trumpist or like playing Trump politics. So you might as well dance. You might as well lean in. Like, you've already been labeled, so therefore go right in. Like, it doesn't mean that you have to say, like, you know, like I'm a huge Trump supporter or like go MAGA, but it just means like, yeah, man, I'm a true conservative and I believe in conservative values, and we're going to build a bridge with, you know, our American counterparts, and that's it. You know, I'm just blown away at their inability to recognize that they're in a completely new world, and long form, you know, channels like mine and like all the others is the way to convey a message. So, you know, from your point of view, I'm getting the impression that like moving forward, you're likely expecting politicians to embrace the long form content. Is that kind of what I'm gleaning from your latest article?
Yeah. Well, in business or anywhere, you want to study what's worked in the past. And what Trump did was show that he understood that the media was biased towards his platform. So, you know, he'd go on there and rip them apart maybe, but then he embraced long form content that spoke to people. The conservatives in Canada weren't smart enough to know that. But actually, in the end, it always falls on the leader. We come from a military background. It's the leader's job to make the call. And if you allow yourself to get managed, it was almost like Worm Tongue was like whispering in his ear, don't do that. Don't do that. Right. And in the end, he had so much momentum. In the end, it was his call. But I didn't understand why he wasn't traveling with the press. I understand why he wasn't doing more media interviews. Like, Trump did more media interviews than anybody in the history of the presidency of the United States. It's like they were trying to shield him, hoping not to. You know, when we watch a sports game and your team is up, and then all of a sudden something happens in the last 5 minutes of the game and they start playing defensive. And then that's why these games always get close in basketball and hockey and anything, because the people who are hungry work a lot harder, and you're playing defense, and defense doesn't win in the last 5 minutes, and they just blew the lead. And had he gone on those 3 podcasts, I guarantee he would have won, because a lot of disenfranchised young males who don't generally vote would have heard him. He could have given them hope. And then he only lost by a percentage or very close to 1%. And he could have got new voters into the mix that hopefully could have offset all the new immigrants who all voted for Liberal anyhow. Right. Mm-hmm. So it was a fatal flaw. That person should be fired. But in the end, to me, it says Pierre is not the guy, because we all want to follow officers who inspire us to believe in something. And, you know, I also have the branding company with my partner. And when I look at their socials, they did tons of activity, but very little of impact outside of their echo chamber. Like, anybody I talked to who wasn't a conservative, I asked them, did you ever see a social media post? They said they didn't even see one. Right. And it's because the algorithm just serves your stuff up to the people who already like your stuff. And so the only way to do it is to go on the most liberal talk show in Canada and do an interview. That's how you get exposed to new people. And that defense just made me want to vomit. And I lament for the future of Canada, because I don't know if we can survive another 4 years. And I'm not being dramatic. I mean, there are separatist movements growing outside of Quebec, and our currency and economy is tanking. And I think they've brought in this globalist from the World Economic Forum in Carney, who is not really interested in helping Canadians. He's interested in making Canadians upset about the environment or transgender issues, while they're just moving money behind the scenes. And
well, so what do you think is the reason why Canadians are so enamored by the status quo? Because that's essentially what they're voting for. They're just voting for the status quo. What does the Liberal Party offer up to those Canadians that are voting for them? I can't wrap my head around it. I mean, numbers scream, right?
Yeah.
The numbers suck. So what is it? I mean, I don't suspect you're a Liberal voter. I used to be a Liberal voter, but I didn't vote Liberal this time because I just didn't see how I could possibly bring the same party back in for status quo stuff when status quo essentially means we're falling off a cliff. Like, what do you have an insight into the psyche of the voter that's voting? in the Liberals?
I think there's one thing that Canadians take great pride in, and we saw it in the military, is that we're a little bit superior to the US on an individual basis, right? Like you bring an infantry battalion down to train with the Rangers, and they're pretty much equal. No offense to your American listeners, but they just were, because we're smaller, we're able to do like a little bit more intensive training. And I think that some voters who wanted to be the timing of Trump coming in, I think a lot of boomers want to feel morally superior to the US. And so Trump coming in and saying something to Canada made them want to hate Trump. And then the closest affiliation politically to Trump was the Conservatives, even though Pierre didn't align with Trump. He should have, as you said, because he got put in the same basket anyhow, or at least espoused it. And then that desire to feel morally superior trumped what the nation needs. And these baby boomers who have it so good, they have all of the wealth. They voted for their dental benefits. They voted for the status quo, and they voted for their comfort over the country. And I think, their kids and grandkids will resent them for this decision because it was about their morals, and they didn't really dig into what the issues were. Because like you said, if you look at the last 10 years, 1.3% GDP growth over 10 years, it's like one of the slowest ever. It ranks lowest amongst the G8 countries. Nobody can buy a house. Inflation's out of control. Our military is a complete disaster. Crime is rampant in our cities. We have zombie wastelands of fentanyl addicts, and nobody seems to be paying attention to that stuff. But I put it as a failure of the Conservative Party. Pierre, it was a failure. You didn't make the right call, and his advisors, I don't know. I think we all wanted a Canadian version of something like Trump. Maybe not as edgy as Trump, but like a Canadian who just made you stand up. And I think if he would have gone on Rogan, brought an apple on as a joke and taken a bite of an apple and kind of said, Trump hates Trudeau's Canada, but that's not Canada. And I represent the Canada that is the strongest ally to the US. If he would have gone on there and said that, Americans would have loved him. Canadians would have loved him. People would have rallied behind somebody who said something meaningful. And we get into this in the branding company a lot, is too many people are scared of being authentic. They don't want to say anything controversial, and then they end up doing nothing great if you're not willing to take a risk. It's very sad. I'm interested in your thoughts on what's going to happen with Alberta and Saskatchewan. Quebec is...
Well, I know Quebec pretty well, having lived here my whole life.
Yeah.
I don't know how well the separatist movement is alive here in Quebec. I've heard rumblings, and I know as a Anglo here in Quebec, especially with my boomer family, it's the fear that if they don't vote Liberal, we'll separate and we'll be just flapping in the wind. But the reality is, as Anglos, we're a second-class citizen here. We always have been. We're legislated against. It's the only place in Canada where you can have laws that actively discriminate against a ethnic group, the Anglo-Irish, and it's fine because they just do notwithstanding. Now, seeing that as a long-term play, that just opened the door to separatist movements anywhere. I mean, and to see the federal government bend over backwards to protect Quebec at all costs so they don't separate. Okay, well, why can't Alberta leverage that? Why can't Saskatchewan leverage that? So I see, like you said, now Twitter's just fired up with Wexit movements, and rhetoric. And I understand why. Because why would you want to stay in a federation that is going to essentially keep you hamstrung, not allow you to develop your resources, not allow them to be shipped across the great country that we have to export it to the rest of the world that is desperately in need of these resources? There's just so much hypocrisy, and there's nothing in terms of support from the federation, which from my perspective, the point of the federation is to keep you a federation. But they've done everything in their power to ensure that we're not going to be unified. And so, I mean, that's just my take on it. I don't know if Quebec is going to push for separation, but I think the only way that's going to work is that it has to be pluralistic. You have to get the Anglos involved. And I mused openly that, hey, maybe I'm a separatist now, but if you got me on board, you got the Anglos on board, you would have a full-blown separatist movement, not based on language, based on we don't like Ottawa. We should be in charge of our own destiny. So that's kind of the way I see it now. Will it happen? I don't know, but definitely the fires are getting stoked.
the kind of thinking that's missing in our society. Like, we have to ask ourselves, why can't we have a transnational pipeline? Like, just like, why isn't there a pipeline, right? And from what I've been able to figure out is, the dock workers union, it's interesting how critical things affect it, but the dock workers union affect a lot of ridings in Montreal that are key, and they make a lot of money unloading Saudi oil, right? And that kind of thing, it will burn the ass of the Westerners. And you're probably too young, but in the 90s, when we were a hair width away from separation, from the voting in Quebec when they voted.
I was at the rally downtown in Montreal. It was a blast.
Right? So it was like less than a percentage difference, right? But what happened behind the scenes is we kind of bought Quebec off through transfer payments. There was huge amount of transfer payments that Ontario carried, but Ontario is getting older. Its manufacturing base is gone. It can't really afford to fund the nation. So the nation is printing money to make transfer payments. It's kind of making Quebec a bit of a welfare province. So they don't want to leave. The separatist movement is there because they can't really sustain itself. They've lost innovation. They don't have that power and joie de vivre they had years ago. But the issue is Alberta is never going to pay for Quebec because they've screwed them out of developing their industry. So I think it's not Quebec. I think it's the West that could very easily vote to go south. And I'm very worried that Carney will not be able to hold it together. And because the media is concentrated in Ottawa and Toronto, Canadian media, it doesn't really represent that side. And interesting times ahead, my friend.
Very interesting times ahead. The state of the Federation is going to be, I think, tested very strongly over the next 4 years. And that's not even, we're not even talking about the fact that, well, it's a minority government. The NDP has been wiped off the map. So there's no other left-leaning party. So it's the Bloc and the Conservatives that could essentially call a no confidence vote at any point. It's a totally different dynamic. But what does that do? That just puts us into a never-ending loop of no confidence votes. And then you end up with a non-functioning parliament, which actually may be a good thing. Who knows? If you just say, well, provinces, you're on your own.
I think Ben Mulrooney is looking at making a run.
No.
Have you seen him on Twitter? Like, the guy is
he's very active.
Yeah, and he's actually saying interesting things. Like, but I always thought he was kind of a media clown. But his content is good. I would love if General Hillier was feeling up to it, Rick Hillier, but he was a liberal in the past, but I think he's moved a little bit conservative, especially over some of the protests downtown. But, who can we think of who'd be a strong Canadian that could be a change agent for Canada?
Well, I'm glad you brought that up because I can't think of anybody that like arouses my passions for Canada. The only guy that comes to mind is literally Don Cherry. I loved watching that guy. I got fired up during Hockey Night. Yeah, there you go, right on.
He signed me a picture when I was in Yugoslavia. We were on Coach's Corner, our hockey team, when we played.
That's awesome. Back home in my basement, there's a picture of me, my buddy Alex, Christmas Day, and we got the thumbs up. We're in Afghanistan, right? He literally showed up on Christmas Day to shake our hands and say good work. That's the type of guy I think we need. Granted, he's not a politician, but at least somebody who believes in what Canada is and can be. I kind of have an idea of where it should go. I'm curious to know, like, if somebody would have like a really good, powerful vision for Canada, what would you like that to be?
Oh, we're all very proud Canadians. Like, I have the Maple Leaf tattooed on my body. But I think the geopolitical reality is changing, that we have to become a regional alliance. And maybe give up a little bit, because when people attack Elon for saying Canada is not a real country, I don't think they understand how his brain works. Is that by metrics of what makes a country in terms of border, unity, shared purpose, Canada doesn't have it because we're all spread along the border of the US. So it's hard to maintain it. So I think the whole notion of nations has to evolve a little bit as the world changes. Now we can be friends with people in any country, not just in our tribe or our village. My shared values go across borders. Like, I love to hang out with people from any other country who have my shared values. They're not defined by Canada because I don't share Ottawa's values. You know what I mean? Like, in terms of what they see about meritocracy or any of that stuff. I think if we were to get somebody, I was thinking like between Jordan Peterson and Kevin O'Leary and a few people who can kind of focus on getting back to traditions that work for us and meritocracy, our nation could be amazing if we were to harness our minerals, our energy, our nature, and work collaboratively with the US and Mexico. Because geopolitically, our borders are so safe, But I think what Trump is identifying is that our north is the most exposed. That's why he's talking about Greenland. That's why he's talking about Canada, is because there are ships being made by our enemies to go into the north. And but it's hard for humans to think 20 years down the road. We kind of think, am I going to get more benefits next week, or what's going to happen? And I listened to Kevin O'Leary, and I think in the past I would have rejected it, but I think he suggested that the U.S., Canada, and Mexico all adopt the U.S. currency so that it's easier to have a flow, become a regional alliance, still keep our national borders like the EU, right? But then become a bloc that could literally kick the ass of anything in the world. But if we're divided and fighting, I don't know. I just know I don't want to go into politics because I can't deal with.
I mean, ultimately, I think a lot of this comes down to, you're a serious human being. I'm a serious human being. I take things seriously. I think everything more or less matters. I'm not a nihilist. We served. That's a real thing that we did. We believe in our country. Like you said, you have a tattoo of the maple leaf. I have a tattoo of the maple leaf. I even have a shamrock. Like, these are things that I identify with as being Canadian. But you mentioned shared values. I can't really pin what our values are anymore. I can't really pin what our vision is as a country. I don't even know what our slogans are. I don't know what our myths are. I think we've got so many gaps in our national identity because we've gone down this route of multiculturalism and post-nationalism, whatever that means, that we're now just hollowed out. And that's where I think this election has really exposed that. What does it even mean to be Canadian? Is it the boomer that gives the two middle fingers? Are those elbows up? Is that Canadian values? I'm so perplexed because I take things seriously, but it just seems like most people don't. And because of that, it makes things a little bit unnerving, to put it lightly.
What Canada I would love it to be is what I learned in the military when I think some airborne sergeants said, quiet professionalism. Like, the U.S. might be a little bit more loud about some things, but what Canada was known for in the growth of the country was hard things. Like, it was hard to populate Canada. Our rivers didn't go east-west. They went north-south. We had to go across the Canadian Shield. You couldn't survive a winter in Saskatchewan alone. You had to work with people, right? Like, it wasn't like the individuality of the Midwest. And I would love us to embrace what we had in World War I and World War II of, we do hard things, but we don't brag about it, but we do help each other. But we're still very merit-based. And we should tell people who come to Canada, this is what we are. We do hard things. It's not a handout country. It's not an apology country. It's a country that's proud that it built something exceptional, and we want exceptionalism. And I think we're going the opposite direction of exceptionalism, which is just going to run out once the money's gone. And people don't understand that it can all fall apart. It's just, have you ever read the book Born Fighting by James Webb? Oh my God, must read for you or any of your listeners. Honestly, it was the one light this year of this guy is an ex full colonel in the U.S. Army, but his story is exceptional. But he writes about, J.D. Vance was a fan of it, but he writes about the Scottish Irish and how big of a role they played in America because they were people who resisted authority, who were never conquered by the Romans, but disproportionately America was started by these Scottish Irish, the Scottish that they put into Northern Ireland. And it will just give you tingles about why our society is exceptional, because we took these very unique humans who resisted authority, but who were very resourceful, very tough. Like, they wouldn't follow an officer because he was a Rupert from London, England, from a family. They would only follow officers who could fucking kill and lead. But the book is like intellectual, but inspiring and accurate about the Midwest. And then he talks about what happened in the South and in the Appalachians. It's just, I think you'll love that book.
That's really interesting. Yeah. I mean, nailing down our myths, and Peterson talks about this a lot too, right? The country is a weird thing when you think about it. It's like this collection of people from all over the place, especially here in Canada and in the US. And you just came together and created a government and somehow managed to keep everything together. It's fascinating that this complex beast even exists, but to maintain it, damn, man, that is a monumental task. And it's almost spiritual, because what are the individual things that you can do on a tactical level that keep it from falling apart? Every little decision politically could have drastic effects 10, 15 years down the road. And so, like you were talking about, like meritocracy and stuff like that, as soon as we start getting away from that and we start seeing it everywhere, and, I'm bringing this up because you did a post about just being on base and seeing just the lack of physical respect for your own PT standard. Too many fat troops and weird hair and just poor overall dress standards. I've seen it going to reserve units. And I was always kind of I like pushing back. I like undoing my bottom button, wearing, non-issued
SF
boots.
guys always have personality, right? But it's not personality that's unearned, right? Like you work hard. I had an amazing Sergeant Major Bartlett. Some of the listeners may even know, but I asked him once when I was a young second lieutenant, because I admired his leadership. I said, how do you make these guys love you so much? And he's so cool. He didn't have a degree, but he just goes, sir, the way to make an elite force is work them harder than everybody else, tell them they're different, and let them wear something that lets them stand out from the average, right? And so I think that speaks to you. Like I always have my sideburns a little too long, right? Because I'm not a conformist, but I'm a top performer, right? But I went on to Canadian Forces Base Petawawa because I was doing a big trial in Pembroke, helping a veteran who was getting fucked over on a crazy case. And that's a whole other episode. But I took my son, who came up with me, another lawyer, onto the base because I hadn't been there for 15 years. And that was to visit. But when I served there, it was full of hardcore motherfuckers. Like there were still the remps, you know what I mean? But even they were in better. But the infantry badges I saw looked like the mechanics of the past. But in the Canucks, it was the Star Wars Cantana freaks in uniform. I was dumbfounded. And the guy who was with me is from overseas in the Middle East, this lawyer, and he goes, Philip, are these men going to protect your country? And I'm like, we don't even know if they're men, honestly, buds. Like, and then I had a call. I was telling a story about to a guy who was in Ottawa, who's very high up. And then he told me another story that will piss off your listeners. So he goes into NDHQ, and in the cafeteria on Friday, there's not one uniform. So he asked somebody who's exceptionally high up, closest to the top, what's going on? He's like, well, we're not wearing our dress uniform anymore because we're a field fighting force. So everybody wears combats, but then this is what he said. Some of our service members were triggered wearing combats every day of the week. So we've started Casual Fridays, which is now called Flip-Flop Fridays. So I'm going to do a video series next week. I'm going to introduce They Them Thursdays, Woke Wednesdays. If that's what's happening from the top down, right? Directly from the Liberal government, like elbows up is not going to save us. Flip-Flop
Fridays?
Flip-Flop Fridays, because it's triggering to wear combats every day of the week.
Phil, we're fucked. Oh my God.
It just hurts to hear that. Like it fucking hurts.
Oh my God. So, okay, we're in Ottawa. This has happened in Ottawa, in nation's capital.
Yeah.
And so this is Carling campus. So they can walk around in flip-flops at work on a Friday and these are members of the Canadian Armed Forces, but like the actual troops, not the civilian staff. This is
no
soldiers.
Civilian staff, yeah. And I'm not sure how many are wearing, like they're calling it Flip-Flop Fridays. I think probably like the officers in NDHQ aren't wearing flip-flops, but some people are getting away with it. But that's what it's being called now. It's not Casual Fridays. It's called Flip-Flop Fridays. In terms of shorts, and no, it's not the civilians. It's to give them a break from wearing combats 5 days a week because we're a field fighting force. That's what she may have said.
Let me digest that for a second. These people join the military to defend Canada, and they don't like the idea of wearing a combat uniform to go to work. That to me is just
civilianization. This is my solution. I'll float it by you because I've been thinking about it.
Yep.
I think for the nation, if I could change it, I think like voting, there should be some degree of service where it's not just military, but if you do 3 years in the military or the Peace Corps or a Canada Corps, then you get then you can vote. Like every citizen should have to give 3 years to something greater than them. But then when I was thinking about the recruiting crisis, we're not attracting good people. Like it's a huge shortfall. But if you were to double down on being, a force of lethality, you'd attract the right people. And then what I would say is, if you give us a 5-year engagement, we're going to put $10,000 a year into a down payment for your home when you leave the military. and the federal government will guarantee your mortgage, with some criteria, kind of like a GI Bill. But in today's world, like, people can't afford. I bought my first house in the military at 26, right? Like, show me a 26-year-old today who can afford to buy a house, right? But if you were to do that and allow people who decide to serve a way to get a mortgage, we might be able to kind of generate something and help people. But I don't know who the heck wants to join the military right now. I know some great people who tried, and recruiting is run by such bozos that the good people who want to join can't even get in. My daughter was going to join. She's hardcore. It took so long, and she changed her mind because it took 9 months for her to get a response. And she has a science degree. She does Ironmans. It took 9 months to get a response. The whole system needs to be upset and get rid of the bureaucracy.
Yeah. Well, I mean, as far as I can tell, you're talking about a few things there, especially on the recruiting side of things. There's a recruiting ad here in Montreal, right? It's a billboard ad, and it basically just has like a greasy civvy with long hair, just with like his uniform, like his like typical civvy clothes, and then the other half is like CAD Pat. And it's not inspiring. It just says like join. If you don't know what that is, you don't know what that even is. Before, at least during the war, you had join, and you had a guy with a weapon, looking mean. And you go, shit. In the States, you have ads to join the Marine Raiders, and I wanted to reenlist just by looking at a picture because I got that fire still.
Yeah.
A 19-year-old goes, oh shit, that looks badass. I wanted to join the JTF just from a picture in Petawawa. I was like, what is that? It's like, oh, it's a JTF too. I'm like, is that something that you can apply to? It's like, yeah, it's special forces. That idea that you can recruit the best and brightest, but you need to tap into what they want to do, which is, for men, it's adventure. A call to something greater. Not, hey, oh yeah, I remember as it says, great, sign up for a great new job, or like something like that. I'm like, no, that's not, it's not a job. Because I can get a job at McDonald's when I'm 20. I can get a job in some stupid company, like working in a cubicle. I don't want a job if I want to join the military. I want to kick ass and take names. And every time I see like, oh, we got to improve recruiting, they talk about housing and they talk about like these tangible things that are very bureaucratic. I didn't join. I don't know about you, but I didn't join because I didn't even really care about the pay. I didn't want to blow shit up. I wanted to look cool. I wanted to serve my country. I thought it was the right thing to do. And if you were just to focus that, you don't need a mega mind in marketing to figure that out. And then start moving into like, hey, well then how do we keep these guys? Okay, then it's the housing, then it's the pay and all that shit.
Yeah.
But also fitness. If I were to join now and see, I don't want to be surrounded by like people that are not taking their fitness seriously, because that's a sign to me that your head's not in the game. If your head's not in the game, why do I want to be around here? And then the only track you can go on, in my opinion, if you're a hard charger these days, is special forces. So you got to move to Kansoff. Because if you don't move to Kansoff, well, what else are you going to do? You're just going to bumble around and be around guys that just don't want to be there, and they're fat, lazy, and like got pink hair. That's just the way I see it. And what you're saying about civil defense force, all that stuff, that requires a monumental shift in the way Canadians think. So like, how do we get over that hump? Do we need to completely collapse in order for people to go, oh, I guess we need to fix this? Or is there like a sensible solution that is going to come from the government that we just elected that already destroyed the Canadian forces? Like, where do we go from here?
I don't know how we fix it, honestly. I don't know how we fixed it, because with it, like, that's why criticize Trump and his team however somebody wants. In order to promote change, you need to create friction. And to be a change agent and to disrupt, like, everything that is entrenched power will fight you, attack you, say you can't do it, right? And then because they're just trying to preserve their position, their great government job, right? Like, you can't fire a government official, you can't fire a teacher, you can't, like, when you have these institutions that are taking over, you can't institute change, and you need a really powerful person to do that. And that's where I think it goes back to Pierre. If he wasn't prepared to go on Joe Rogan and advocate for a very powerful platform of his own, like, I don't see how he was going to institute, widespread change, taking down institutions that don't want to allow them to be reorganized.
About institutions and institutional change, you mentioned that, you're representing a troop and his court case. I've been noticing just in general, Canadian Armed Forces soldiers have to take VAC to court to get their benefits. And I'm speaking specifically about cancers that were clearly service related that VAC just didn't want to hear it until there was evidence from the United States that, hey, there's overwhelming evidence that we're getting sick from burn pits and stuff like that. From your point of view, is this a growing trend where troops are realizing, hey, I can actually sue and I have like my rights that are infringed and I need to actually go do this in order to get the benefits and the resources that I'm actually owed? Is that a growing trend that you're seeing in your office?
I haven't done much in the way of litigation against VAC. I've helped a bunch of people appeal a VAC decision, and I find knowing how to write that can help, right? But like I'm overwhelmed by requests to sue VAC, but I haven't seen a lot of success there. I don't know if you guys have, or if you know. It's very hard to sue the government. Like I'm suing the government for mistreatment of some previous soldiers, and Department of Justice, they have unlimited pockets. They're very close with the federal government, the federal court, right? And so to try and get, these justices have been appointed by politicians, but nobody wants to disrupt things. I find there's cases that require justice, and it's hard to get the federal court to do something that disrupts things. But I haven't seen. It'd be interesting for me to learn more about people who have been successful suing them for denied coverage. I don't know do you know what law firm is doing that these days, or?
No, I don't know what law firm it was actually, because I brought it up when I was chatting with Tim Jensen down in Texas with the Grunstyle guys, because they actually have a keen interest in what's going on up here, because they see just veteran issues as veteran issues, and we fought the same wars alongside them. Every American basically fought with a Canadian at some point, and vice versa. They don't want to have us suffer, and they want us to benefit from the hard work that they've done. And I brought up the fact that there was 2 troops that were at Camp Nathan Smith that finally had their cases brought to court and won against VAC, but it took years, and they have pretty serious cancers that VAC was just saying they're not service related. And, you're saying like there's folks like from the CAF and you're going against the CAF. It's just, for me, again, and I think that touches on the recruiting side of things as well. If you have an inkling that your government is not going to have your back after a career where you go and literally put your life on the line, I think that's got to reside somewhere in the back of your mind. Like, shit, like maybe all this stuff that I'm seeing in the news, like maybe I won't join, because as much as they say we're like a CAF family, they don't really have their backs. And, they can listen to my show and like other shows and realize like, oh man, like if something really hits the fan, like maybe we won't get supported. Because I think that's a big issue that's just not being addressed. And I didn't hear any of it on the campaign. Aside from Pierre that put out a video with his like policy and promises for veterans, there was no mention of defense or veterans issues by any of the candidates, and especially not at the leadership debate, which for me, I was like, man, we clearly don't matter.
I think there's interesting stuff to unpack there. Defense wasn't really a big topic, I found in it. And, as I mentioned in my video, like going into Base Petawawa and seeing maxi pads in the men's washrooms, like that I found was odd, and that served Trump. I don't think most people agree with that. I think most people would agree that we need a fighting force, especially if there's rumblings around the world of stuff going on, and nobody was talking about how ineffective. I think the Conservative Party was scared to make it look like they were attacking any type of diversity elements in the military. Like the first thing the U.S. did was fire anybody who was behind DEI initiatives, right? Like focus back on merit. That kind of conversation would have resonated with Canadians. I think most Canadians know we need a fighting force. When it comes to veterans, I've struggled because what I have seen a lot is disproportionate payouts to people who weren't really in the fight. And what happens whenever you create a system that compensates being a victim, different people can create a victim mentality. Like I think our whole society has been one that we've created markets for victims, especially like sexual assault in some cases. And how, like when you look at if you were running an organization, how do you decide? Because whenever you deny somebody, you're immediately, if you're in Veterans Affairs, if you deny somebody, how do you defend that denial? Because all the person can say is, you're not supporting people who dedicated their lives, right? So how do you actually have a system that puts the money where it should be? Because I find like most of the real combat guys and girls don't want to complain. They'll minimize what they're experiencing. And then all of a sudden you'll get some W trucker who ran over a goat saying that they deserve $245,000 because they're having night sweats and can't sleep. You see what I'm saying? Like the ability for humans to make up stories to get free money tax free is considerable. So how do you have an organization that has to take a limited pool of money and make sure it gets to the people who deserve it? Because anytime you say no, people are going to go to Twitter and say you don't care about veterans, right? Like, so to me, it's a very tough situation to be in. And I think we need to get more ex-military people into Veterans Affairs to help manage that, as opposed to bureaucrats who are getting paid good money and are just moving paperwork at a slow rate. And I think we hurt veterans because it takes so long to get decisions, and we got to give authority to Veterans Affairs to do things fast. But I've seen Veterans Affairs be okay, you know what I mean, to some people, but I haven't got too many of those other cases. But
yeah, well, I like what you said about the mandatory service aspect for citizenship. That's basically straight out of Starship Troopers, right? Like once I read that book, I watched the movie, that really had a big impression on me, because in order to be a citizen, you had to serve, right? So, and for them, it was the mobile infantry. So, but I agree. If you have a sense of service, that sets up a feeling of gratitude for your society as well, because you've given something, and it doesn't have to be military service, but something on the front lines, whether it's in the hospitals or whatever it may be. There are other models that we can follow that I think would be great for the country. And then to expand on that, your departments and your cabinet ministers and those that have a portfolio, I find it so hard to wrap my head around the fact that, a Veterans Affairs minister never served a day in the military. That to me doesn't sit well. And same with anybody that's in charge of the military here.
Yeah.
I just find it so bizarre that we've created this society where you can be in charge of this massive organization like the military, but have no experience with the military whatsoever. I just don't understand how we run our politics that way. But if you had people that had served, and it's mandatory service, and you'd have a bigger pool of folks that would go through the military, you would have a better chance of having a minister that's really competent. And therefore, I think that's kind of like the generational play that I think we have no choice to start implementing. But as soon as you start talking about this, they go, oh, you're an ultra right-wing populist. It's like, oh.
That's why I say,
where do we go?
The military is not for everybody. Like, I love the military, right? But like the Peace Corps, if it was done well, like going overseas and helping other countries, like you're serving, right? Like you're outside of your box. And then I envisioned making a Canada Corps where you could go and help rebuild First Nations communities or plant trees or do stuff for Canada, anything that kind of gets you out of a comfort zone that involves a degree of suffering. And I think then with those three boxes, every new citizen should have to, if they come over, unless they're starting a business that employs more than 10 people, should have to serve in order to get citizenry. And I think, but when we can put people in boxes like fascist or this or that or communist, we don't get solutions because people are just putting people in boxes. And the solution is usually in the middle after a lot of friction of ideas. But in today's society, we can't even suggest ideas without getting shut down. Like I bought the Cybertruck, right? And I was driving through a net zero community, and I had this lady.
Wait, what's a net zero community?
There's actually an interesting community in London that's one of the first of its kind, where every building is essentially net zero. They have solar panels, like it's built so that it's a great idea, right? Now I'd stayed in a couple of them, like the dishwasher sucks, the dryer doesn't do anything.
So you're out like scrubbing, using more resources. Yeah. Okay.
If you ever use a net zero dryer, it's fucking frustrating. but this woman comes up and calls me a fascist. And I'm like, lady, this is an electric car. This is from the company that made electric cars plausible.
Cool.
Whatever the politics are, you're calling me a fascist. But like, this is a society we live in where we can't have conversations because people are busy putting labels on other people. I just don't know how we get any amazing solutions to move us forward. But there's so much tech at our hands. Like there's so much knowledge about fitness that you talk about. Like if you started in the military and they used all the top stuff, like you could create like superhumans in terms of fighting force and being healthy. And we're not leveraging any of it because we're so busy just pretending we know everything.
Yeah. I mean, I was just having this conversation with a friend of mine about fitness, and it started, I started bringing up the fact that, well, yeah, I mean, we have the same philosophy that fitness is the gateway to a better society because it requires you to embrace personal responsibility. once you start embracing personal responsibility, your whole society changes, because what I decide affects you. And also, if I'm better, then everything around me gets a little bit better. My family, everybody's a little bit healthier. And just on the fitness side of things, we would just also see a massive shift in where we have to allocate dollars, like healthcare. So that's a really simple, and that's how way I've seen it. I've seen it in very simple terms. Like if we just improve health by, let's say, 5% across the board, that would have a massive savings for all Canadians. But we can't get past that idea of, hey, let's instill a little bit of personal responsibility and make sure that you're a little bit fitter. Because there's even a narrative out there that somehow this is like ultra right-wing nationalist shit. It's like, well, are you serious? I mean, fitness, in my opinion, is not right or left wing. It's just human. It's a human thing. But we've even politicized that, to echo what you're talking about, like on the fitness side of things, like you don't even need enough fitness to be a superhuman. You just need the bare minimum for anybody joining, let's say the CAF, to do, 20 minutes of activity a day, show up, be able to do 10 push-ups and some pull-ups. That's it. And you would save a shit ton of money in cost, because so many of the troops get washed out now because they're so out of shape. They can't withstand BMQ, let alone an infantry course. I just don't understand why there's no urgency on that front. Like, I'm waiting. Like, hey, like, Carney, give me a call, bro. I'll sort this out. I got a national program ready to go, but the will isn't there.
I think like the military example at Petawawa upset me, because I thought that would be immune from kind of what's going on in society. And it's symptomatic of a society that is now allergic to doing hard things. And I was telling my son, success individually, in a family, in a company, in a country, is rooted in doing hard things. But we've got to a point where we're now kind of embracing this. No, you don't need to do hard things. You're amazing just as you are. You can get fit, decide whatever you want to be, demand a job, go on Twitter. Like, we don't have a society that's rewarding excellence, but excellence comes from doing hard things, not from identifying in a group that allows you to lecture everybody. And so what we see in our society is people are just clamoring to identify as a group that's been victimized, and then asking for handouts, as opposed to, when certain immigrants come over, they're willing to do hard things, like in our history, and they build businesses and they build strong family structures. And then, but how do we bring back the fact that hard things are not just a nice to have? It's necessary for human flourishing. And fitness represents doing hard things. The growth comes from the failure rep. You got to work till failure. But in today's world, you don't have to fail, because everybody is equal, right? If you don't, doing hard, you shouldn't be rewarded for doing hard things, right? Somebody who doesn't do hard things but claims to be X, Y, or Z is just as good as you. Like, how do we get back to valuing people who do hard things?
Well, from my observation, if the jiu-jitsu gym that I go to, my kids go to, is any indication, there is a massive upswell in kids that want to do hard things, jiu-jitsu being that thing. Because that is a rough sport. And, my kids competed this weekend, and it's hard, man, to watch them, because they're fighting hard, and my wife's in tears because, our little girl is on the mat. She's 5 and
Amazing.
she's getting, but this is imposed, and I'm doing it with them. I don't like getting choked and strangled and my arm ripped off from time to time. It sucks. But I also know that I heard this somewhere. It might've been on Rogan, but as men back in the day, a son especially would see me toiling on the farm. He would understand dad's working hard. He's lifting shit. He's putting stuff on a truck. But now this is what I do. I'm in an office. It's temperature controlled. It's easy, right? It's not manual labor. So I need to go and show him, like, he knows I was in the military, but he doesn't know what that means. So I need to show him, yeah, I'm on the mats. I'm doing that hard thing that you're doing, that you find hard as well. And that's an important value for me. And if, like I said, if the jiu-jitsu gym is any indication, there's a lot of kids and a lot of dads that are starting to recognize that as an important aspect of growth. And so I'm optimistic.
Like, I think if we, like, our school system, I don't know if I had kids again, if I would put my kids through normal school system, because I've lost confidence in the quality of education. And I've seen what people can do with 3 hours of homeschooling and a good iPad with an avatar that creates tailored learning. But, imagine if we had kids and we immediately started teaching them mindfulness, sit still and concentrate. And then another part during the day, they did learn jujitsu, right? And another day, they're solving puzzles and problems. Like, think of how we could create humans that are mindful, tough, and critical thinkers. Instead, we just baby children up until 18. So now we have a bunch of young men. I'm interested in your take on this. To me, testosterone is a gift to humanity, but it's a gift that only materializes under struggle, right? So what testosterone did is, when you experience struggle, fear from tribes, need for food, that struggle and testosterone created men. But in today's world, we have testosterone, albeit a little less because of plastics, but we have testosterone without struggle. And so then it makes very kind of petulant men who think that they're tough because they play Call of Duty and they can jerk off to chicks on Pornhub, but they're not doing anything. And I was telling, who was I telling the other day? I think why men have become complacent is that porn has gotten so good that the DNA or cellular structure of the man, the reason why we would struggle, build things, right? Farm, is so we could get a mate. But when artificial reality is so real that your cells think you're mating when you're watching porn. And so then you just sleep in your parents' basement until 35 because your cells think you just procreated, right? And so we've just made this, I don't know how we get out of it, honestly.
Well, to touch on that from a teacher's perspective, I realized that the education system is basically all feminine energy, especially at the elementary level, right? That's just fact. If you find a man as a teacher in an elementary school, there might be one, and the other one's like the janitor, and he's usually a phys ed teacher. You go to the secondary, there's a few more, but overall, it's a very female dominated profession. And it makes sense. It's very nurturing, and it makes sense now. But I was talking to my mom about this. She was a career teacher, right? Most of my family were teachers. But she said back in the day when she was going through school, over half the teachers were all World War II veterans.
Amazing.
Men. And that made the society completely different because you had men that appreciated struggle, that literally went through a war, and that were able to identify and also connect with the boys that they recognize, like, they need struggle. They need to be treated a certain way. And it's not the same as the same you treat a girl. And they also had a lot more physical activity because you can't just expect a young boy to sit, pay attention, and do his work without any kind of physical stimulus. But the system is built around that. And that's why we get drugged. That's why inevitably you end up in this system where it's like, oh, you got to see a therapist. And so it's the emasculation of boys because ultimately it's the female teacher that can't deal with the masculine energy that is coming her way. And they just want to shut them up and make sure that they can run their class. And so I understand that you want to be able to run a class, but I also realize that you can't keep this system going.
There's a kind of new school system that's kind of meant for boys that incorporates active learning, activity, problem solving. And then you still teach the boys they have to sit down and concentrate because I think they're losing their ability to read. But if you gas them on a run, give them a nap, then ask them to read, then tell them to build a fort and teach them math. You know what I mean? Like, that's what would help our society, but you can't fix it because the unions and the education system isn't open to that type of change.
Yeah. And that is a big issue because the unions are not fighting the best interests of the students, they're fighting the best interests of the teachers. And until we crack that, and there's signs that this is changing, especially with the homeschooling movement really starting to explode. And that's because of cultural change and the need for a better solution. And, I had the privilege of teaching at an all boys school. Cool. High school here in Montreal, and it was phenomenal for me, especially coming basically right off a tour and finding that job. It was great because they were Roman Catholic and they had a lot of discipline involved. You had to wear a suit and tie. They were very sports oriented and they understood what it was to like raise a young man into a man. And it was their motto was man for others. And so their value system was instilled from day one. And I'm like, every guy kind of needs this. And they understood that there's a rite of passage at the end as well. And so they had a whole ceremony that was included. Whereas now most men, unless you join the military, and that's where I still have a lot of hope, the military is still going to be there. Granted, it's it's kind of been perverted a lot recently in the last decade or so. I think it's still going to be a great place to kind of build young men, but it's going to take a little while to build it back, because that ethos, that idea that you end up growing through this because you're going to do hard shit, you're going to dig holes, you're going to be in the rain. That's what built me. That's what built my resilience. That was my passage into manhood. And I think that'll always be there. And there's going to be still that old vanguard that's going to be able to actually train those guys up. And, you know, I'd be honored if I was asked to come back and help with the rebuild, so to speak, because I still believe in this country. I still believe in it strongly. I think we have a lot to give, but we lost our way a little bit. So I'm optimistic for the future. So that's just my 2 cents. So Phil, before we wrap up here, are there any last thoughts or anything that you wanted to bring up in terms of some of the court cases that you're handling and the way forward for Canada?
You know, I'm kind of transitioning out of the law because I'm doing more coaching for businesses, because I find like the law, kind of going along what we've been talking about, is almost post-COVID, I find like there's way less curiosity in the world and a much higher propensity to just want to judge. I found like juries have even changed on, like I represent a lot of men who have been accused of things that happened 5, 10, 20 years ago. And I also represent victims of sexual assault. So I do both sides of it, but the propensity to convict somebody on an allegation that has no corroborating evidence from 15 years ago after a divorce, it's terrifying. It's terrifying what the system will believe because of what we've been taught to believe in the last little while from society. And so I think young men are also at risk, because going to university and getting drunk, like I've got probably 10 files at my office that seem like great kids, like not rape, like I don't, I'd like to kill fucking rapists, you know what I mean? But like who at Frosh Week had sex, and then 2 years later, the girl goes to a woman's rights thing. And they go, well, you couldn't have consented because you were drunk. Well, they were both drunk, you know, but then the guy gets kicked out of school. He loses 3 years of education, doesn't get any credit, and then is railroaded to a conviction based on just, you know, he said, she said. Like it's a dangerous time for that. And I was commenting on TV about the hockey guys in their case here in London, right? Where those World Juniors at the time actually put on video that she said she consented. And the police investigated it 7 years ago and said, there's no case here. But then when it came up in the right political hands, then they laid charges and said, oh, I think there's an attack on Canadian institutions of masculinity. And that's the military and hockey. And it's making some people who are advocates very happy to be able to tear down anything that represented Canadian masculinity. And I think there's a giant cost to that. So I would just say, like, you got to be very careful out there in these days, because the system presumption of innocence is gone on these types of cases. Like we'll let fucking serial break and enters out all day long, or, you know, like the rounders, but the good citizens who get tied up in something because of a bad divorce or something like that, their exposure is so high. It's terrifying. And then I argue with judges, and they're not interested in the fact that there's nuance to how things are. It's if somebody cries and said it happened and it was 12 years ago, it must be true. Like it's terrifying.
Man, having friends that have gone through it.
Yeah.
And I don't wish that on my worst enemy, because the emotional turmoil, the financial stress.
You're destroyed. You're happy to get out, and then you drop 100 or 200 grand trying to save your life. And then in the end, it's like, okay, well, whatever.
Yeah. Yeah. I could see how you could just completely go down into a dark pit of hell and want to burn the whole place down when that shit happens. And I've seen it, and it's one of those things that I don't know what the solution is, but like there's a culture that's behind it. And I don't know if the next 4 years we're going to get to fixing those structural issues that clearly exist but need addressing. And I do agree with what you just said there in terms of the masculine institutions that exist here in Canada, the military and hockey. Those are very much part of Canada's culture. And if you were to wage a culture war, those are the two best institutions to attack. And, you know, I've had some great conversations on the show about that with some other folks, and they said the exact same thing, that if you're going to attack us on a cultural level and tear us apart and divide us, go after the military and go after hockey. And that's what they've done. And it's unfortunate, but I'm optimistic. I'm hoping that the next few years are going to be great. And I made a kind of cheeky post on Twitter or X, whatever you want to call it today, that, man, I'm glad. Actually, this is great. I thought I was going to have zero content ideas for the next 4 years because the conservatives would have been in. So thankfully, we've got all kinds of bad leadership to comment on for the next 4 years and future podcasts. So Phil, I really appreciate your time, man. It's always great talking to you. You've always got a lot of great insights.
You're part of the solution, buds. And I'm at you can see some of my content on TikTok where it does the best. It's at Rogue Lawyer, and pissing people off every day on there.
Yeah, that's, man, I had a TikTok account. I just haven't posted in a long time. I resisted to get it on my phone. So based off your views and your ability to connect with folks on that platform, I think I'm going to open mine up.
Just do it because I'll tell you what, it has this stigma, but even in my other company, we get hired by CEOs of big companies because what people do in their spare time, they don't brag about it. A lot of them go on TikTok. And then the algorithm will find you. So if you have like a veteran or somebody who is struggling with fitness and the algorithm is so brilliant on TikTok that if you post something about helping a veteran who needs to get fit or helping people get fit, it'll put you in their feed, like in a way that, you don't have to be viral to go viral. You don't have to have 100,000 followers. I think you can reach a lot of people around the world who need to hear your message. So
sold. I'll be up. So folks, check out I think my TikTok handle is the Hard to Kill podcast. I'll post it here in the description. So Phil, thanks a bunch. And I'll put your website, again, and we'll put it in the description if anybody wants to reach out to you for any legal advice, even though it sounds like you're kind of winding that down. You're still a great voice of reason in the community, because there's very few that are helping the veterans and those that are in the CAFs. Love what you do there as well. So folks, thanks for tuning in. Don't forget, train hard, fight easy. Don't forget to like and subscribe. See you in the next one. Peace.
What up? All right, brother.